Hello there, AP World students. Let's jump right on into Unit 5, Revolutions. This is by far the significantly largest unit in this course. I'm basically covering all of the historical events that occurred between the years 1750 and 1880, and it's a wild, different world. So let's get into it right now. Okay, so the first big topic to hit on is this new change in European thinking called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is this just huge concept that goes over the dramatic changes of European thought that were occurring right around the 1750s to 1800s. And it was sort of like a second Renaissance, but the first Renaissance was largely about art and just sort of exploring the human experience. This change of thought was all about like questions about government and deep philosophical questions about the good life, about fate or faith, reason, and it once again was sort of rediscovering Greek and Roman thought. It's like, hey, how did they do government in ancient Greece and ancient Rome? What's this democracy thing? What's this republicanism thing? And all that's going to get expounded on over the course of the next slides, because I'm going to cover all the major Enlightenment thinkers right now. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so here's all the famous Enlightenment thinkers. The first guy you gotta know is a dude whose thoughts are very different from everyone else's. Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes generally hated human beings. Okay? He thought people are naturally cruel, greedy, and selfish. If I was teaching this in the real classroom, I would definitely say Thomas Hobbes' favorite modern movie would have been The Purge. Because according to Thomas Hobbes, he believed that the only thing keeping society together was the fact that everyone was afraid of the military and afraid of the police. And he was the first guy who came up with this concept called the social contract. The general standards of how people function in society, why people don't just murder each other all the dang time. And he said that we need to have strong governments to make sure the social contract is always followed and never violated. If anybody breaks the social contract, they gots to be punished, okay? If you break the laws of society, the police, the military will find you. And he thought that any kind of democracy or republican government, it's just not going to be effective enough. It's the only way to have an effective government, in his mind, was to have one dude or female in charge of everybody else that makes all the hard decisions, that has absolute power, that can punish people, and so that's kind of what Thomas Hobbes is about. But he's saying that society has to be kept in fear, or else it's just going to be purge night every night. Okay? So let me read some of these Thomas Hobbes quotes. So, during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition called war. And in such a war, it's every man against every man. Another one. Government is necessary, not because man is naturally bad, but because man is by nature more individualistic than social. Okay, moving on. So, the next thinker is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau, he was totally opposite of Hobbes. He said people want maximum freedom. People are always gonna, if there's a law that government passes where it's like nobody can drink alcohol on Sundays, people are gonna drink on Sundays. Like they're just gonna do it if no one's looking over their shoulder. So maybe in a sense that he does agree with Hobbes in that respect. But Rousseau, he had kind of a different definition of the social contract. He says that only legit governments, democracies and republics, those are legit governments in his mind, they will enforce the will of the people. And this idea that a government made up by the citizens, they can sort of equally restrict or grant freedoms to citizens. He says that some freedom should be restricted. But his bigger idea was this. People should not obey kings. People should follow the other people of their society. People should make a government amongst themselves and not follow some supreme king or some supreme dictator. You do not have to unwillingly submit to an unjust government. If your government is doing, pretty hardcore things in the name of the social contract, well, they're kind of betraying the social contract. But yeah, so the only thing that's stopping people from max freedom is other human beings. Yeah, so Jean-Jacques Rousseau, maybe he did agree with Hobbes in some more respects, but they had different conclusions, because Hobbes' whole thing was the only way people will not purge each other every night is because they're afraid of the police. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, well, the reason why people don't purge each other every night is because people have confidence in their government. And the only way you're going to have confidence in your government is if your government actually, is represented by you. Okay, and I think this is a really cool quote. Freedom is the power to choose our own chains. Wow, that's deep. People in their natural state are basically good, but this natural innocence, however, is corrupted by the evils of society. Yeah, and that's another difference. Thomas Hobbes would say all human beings are naturally evil. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would say all human beings are naturally good, but when you put us all together in society, aspects of society make us evil. So there's a lot of different thoughts now emerging in the world, and it's up to you to decide which side you agree with more. All right, moving on. So next guy, John Locke. John Locke was absolutely in the same category as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Locke really expanded on those ideas. Locke said people are good, people are reasonable and moral, and he's the one who came up with this concept. People have natural rights. He is the founder of liberalism, and honestly, if there's anybody who should be considered the main character of the Enlightenment, it's got to be John Locke. Okay, he's the top of the Enlightenment food chain, and this is his thing. Government's only purpose is to serve people, and all should be equal under the law. That's the real meaning of liberalism right there. All are equal under the law. And here's another point he said. The only task of government is the protection of private property. Wow, that's bold. But yeah, he wants all people to have their lives, their property, their liberty. Yeah, here we go. All mankind being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. So, yeah, treat everybody the same. Nobody's above the law. And this was a wild idea back during his day, because during his time, Europe was largely stratified in the serfs and the nobility and the kings and the clergy. And for him to say everyone should be treated exactly the same, he got a lot of flack for that. But thankfully, his ideas are a big part of our society today. So thanks, John Locke. I appreciate you. All right, next dude, Baron de Montesquieu. Baron, he had a pretty cool idea that if all power is in the hands of just one king or one pope or one dictator, what if your king or your pope or your dictator gets kind of crazy? And what can we do to prevent one person from abusing the powers of government and from hurting their people and taking their rights away and just being a bad king? Well, Baron studied ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and he was like, hey, these countries 2,000 years ago had these pretty cool laws that made it so that there were multiple branches of government. That it wasn't just one person making all the decisions bar none, like this society that Thomas Hobbes supposedly loves. But he says that each branch of government should serve as a check on the others. It's sort of like there's equal power placed in multiple places in this concept that there's less of a chance that power would ultimately be corrupted. Because if one person has all the power, then you're just eventually rolling the dice that a bad dude will take over and it's all going to go downhill from there. But if there's a whole bunch of people in government, they should be able to address situations where one person is now getting out of hand. And then here's another concept that he came up with, which is absolutely going to get referenced in history. There's these obligations between a government and its people, and if a government fails its people, the people have the right to form a new government. So he's sort of saying, like, if your president, if your government isn't working for you, fight them, okay? And yeah, that's a whole lot of that's gonna happen in this time period we're talking about now. Okay, moving on. All right, Voltaire, my man. God, if there is such a thing as an afterlife, I'll tell you, the first person I'm gonna see, I'm gonna hunt this dude down, and we're just gonna hang out. Me and Voltaire. I'm looking forward to it. He came up with the phrase, all men are created equal. And now some of you are like, well, that's men, Mr. Brown. What about all people are equal? Well, stepping stones, kids. So all men are created equal. He loved political satire. So Voltaire didn't write some of these big, long books as much as the other guys did. But Voltaire's ideas definitely do come up. He strongly exposed bad governments. Well, yeah, he largely did that in his satire. He's like, this king is terrible. Here are the things he's done. I think he was the one who found out, like, all these popes had, like, terrible relations with children and did, like, sexual stuff. So he's like, look at all these popes. They're supposed to be the most holy people in the world. They suck. Yeah, he thought religion was corrupt, had no place in government. He opposed the slave trade. He's probably one of the first anti-racists in European history that I can cite. And yeah, he really hated religion. He was, like, so anti-religion. He wrote this book called Candide. If I was teaching a legit college class about this, I would absolutely have my class read the book Candide. It's a really short book. It's only like 100 pages, maybe less. And I'll cover the plot of the book real quick. So, the main character of the book Candide is a dude named Candide who's born, I think he's born like a serf in like rural France. And Candide just has the worst life growing up. But he's in love with the, you can call it like the princess or like the lord's daughter of the place he's working for. And he just dreams about her every night. But every day he goes in the fields and he's like working. He gets whipped and he's like, oh, the pain. But I dream about, what was her name? Conadon or something? It was something with a C. Anyway, so eventually violence comes to his countryside. The Lord is killed. Cunegonde was her name. Cunegonde gets captured. He gets sent into the army. He then sort of has to fight, and he gets shot a bunch. Somehow he ends up in Spain as a prisoner. He's about to be killed, but then an earthquake happens, and then he's thrown onto a ship, and then he's sent to the New World, and he's in the New World, and once again he's like put into slavery. He's like, this is ridiculous. And somehow he makes it back home to France after going basically all around the world and seeing all kinds of crazy stuff. And he finds Cunegonde again, and Cunegonde is like, she's no longer this beautiful young woman. She's like terribly beat up. She's terribly messed up and disfigured, and he still loves her anyway. And Candide and Cunegonde find a little spot in the middle of nowhere, and they're like, we're just going to stay away from governments, and we're just going to work on our own garden and make our little piece of earth as best as it can be. So that's sort of the end thing of that book, and it's a good book. I should read it again. They need to make a movie about it. I'm sure it's already been made, but and the funny thing too is the word Candide means eternal optimism in French. So literally, this guy's name is Happy Thoughts, and the whole book is about how he just continually gets crapped on by various peoples all over the world during this time period. And if you really analyze the book, you could probably pick up that every government's bad, every religion is bad, and the best thing you could do is try to just be nice to people and to build up your own little part of the world. So, that's Candide. Alright, and now the next guy. This guy's probably not going to get taught about in other AP World History classes, because he's not officially in the College Board's notes, but I'm putting him here because he belongs here. Okay? The next dude to talk about is Olida Equiano. His English name is Gustavus Vassa, but I'm going to say Olida. And Olida Equiano has a really interesting life story. He was a slave who, here, I'll just tell you his life story right now. He was born in Nigeria, and when he was 6 years old, he was kidnapped, He was sent to a slave port, put on a slave ship, went through the Middle Passage as like a, 6-year-old boy. It sucked. As soon as he gets to the New World, he's then taken away from the rest of his family. He's sold to a ship captain who employs Olida as his, sort of his translator and sort of his first mate, maybe like even quasi-son. And Olida serves with the ship captain for many years. And eventually the ship captain's nice enough to be like, Olida, you're free. And so Olida ends up in London. And while he's in London, he starts talking to people. And he's like, I was a slave. It was absolutely horrific. Please stop doing this. Everyone in Europe, what are you doing? Stop the slave trade. And he traveled all over Europe, and he showed people the brands he had in his body. He wrote a book called the Interesting Narrative of Olida, or of Gustavus Vassa the African. And in that book, he had this autobiography telling all about the Middle Passage, and a lot of Europeans never really heard about it before. The vast majority of Europeans never went to Africa or the New World or slave ships. For them, it was 100 miles away, might as well have been another planet. But he was the guy who was mostly responsible for getting the word out that Africans were not animals. Africans were capable of as high-level thinking as any white person was. And it was just such a statement for... he's probably the first black dude to ever really talk in academic ways in Europe. And a lot of Europeans recognized the immorality of the slave trade. And through his story, they started the anti-slavery movement called abolitionism. And his biography is primarily responsible for ending the slave trade. The screwed up thing is European society, the society that wasn't really connected with slavery as directly as the New World, Europeans ended slavery largely around the year 1790. But here in the New World, the United States, Brazil, Mexico, slavery kept going into the 1800s. So it was harder to stamp out over here, but at least back in Europe, they would stop it largely because of this man and the things he did. So Olida, good dude. All right, moving on. Okay, another thing that's definitely in relationship to the Enlightenment. Yeah, this is in the Enlightenment, no doubt. People started to think more about science and explaining how the world works. Before people were like, "Hey, clouds are in the sky. It's because God hates us. Hey, it's a storm right now. It must be Zeus or, Thor or something." But finally, for the first time in world history, Europeans were like, actually, let's try to study this stuff. Maybe there's ways to predict the understanding of the Earth, and maybe there's deeper things we can really get at. So Francis Bacon, what a great name, created the scientific method. He's largely seen as the first scientific thinker. And the guy who built off him was Isaac Newton. He created the theory of natural laws, came up with gravity. And Isaac Newton is personally credited with creating the fields of physics and calculus. If there was probably like the smartest dude who ever lived, probably Isaac Newton. Interesting fact, died a virgin. The more you know. But yes, so their thoughts would be the foundation for the Industrial Revolution, and they lived during the Enlightenment and saw these new ideas about government, so like, hey, new ideas about how the world works too. Throw it all in there. All right, moving on. And this is a huge idea in the Enlightenment. I think Voltaire might be given some credit for this, but it wasn't his thing directly. But a whole lot of people in the Enlightenment are finally saying, you know what? Maybe our whole way of thinking shouldn't be all about Jesus, okay? Like, this whole concept that there was this divine right of kings, and we've got to believe in the king because God loves the king. People are now starting to go hard against that. And they're saying, look, people have their faith, they do their faith on Sundays or whatever day you do it, great, that's on you, and government should be largely disconnected from the world of religion. And yes, that was a huge thing done during the Enlightenment, and this idea will eventually diffuse all over Europe. Because, for all of European history, religion, huge part of how people think. But now, the concepts of like atheism and secularism, they're going to start to emerge, And these new values are going to be a big, big part of European thinking. And it's honestly kind of impressive how fast European thinking switched from being like, Jesus all day, to Jesus, maybe just Sundays. So, yeah, pretty fast switch. And all that happened during this time period. All right, moving on. So, I think this is my last slide today. So the American Revolution is absolutely the first major historical event that's sort of influenced by the Enlightenment. There was a whole bunch of dudes here in the United States who were like, hey, Britain's not treating us very well. Britain has this king. This king makes all these laws. We don't participate in the laws. This is kind of screwed up. Hey, we want to make a government that has no relationship to religion because the British king is technically in charge of the Anglican faith. He's trying to impose some stuff on us. We don't like that. We want to do our own thing. America, freedom, justice. And, so the American Revolution. AP people told me, though, that you're not going to get a DBQ on the American Revolution. You're not going to get an SAQ on the American Revolution. If there's any questions related to the American Revolution, it's just going to be like, how is it impacted by the Enlightenment? And I've already just covered that. You're going to have a whole class called AP US History next year, so you'll get a whole lot more detail in this there. But the thing I really do got to mention, though, is this revolution here that created our country would be sort of like the small appetizer, because we were 2 million people on the other side of the world. Our revolution will impact a much bigger deal in world history 13 years later in France. Okay, and that's it for this part. Peace out. See you next time.